Hey guys, this is Mike Lukic, and thanks for joining me again today, and thanks for watching my video. It's been a few months since I've posted a video on here. I was forced to take a bit of a hiatus from poker. I had quite a busy time with work, my wife and I also juggling my two kids who were home the entire time while we were working from home. And during that time, we sold our house in Maryland and moved to a new state. So a lot has been going on over the past few months, and as a result, I have not been able to spend much time at all focusing on my poker study, my poker game, and my content creation. But I'm back. I had a post on my site about a week or two ago outlining all of that and announcing that I'm spending a little bit more time in poker now. And I'm jumping back in with a video today. So before my break, over the course of May and June, I created a 4-part video series on how to use Gto Plus. And the feedback has been awesome. It's been really, really cool to see comments flowing in on a regular basis, even still now, about with great questions, great feedback about just all of the content on Gto Plus. But I also did get several requests for a 5th part to create a video about Flopzilla Pro and how they can be used together. For those of you who don't know, Flopzilla Pro is a piece of software made by the same person who makes Gto Plus. So what this video is meant to show is a little bit about the Flopzilla Pro, its features, and how you can use it with Gto Plus. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time today focusing on the interface, how to navigate it, and how to use the software. I'm going to spend some time talking about some tips on how you can actually integrate it into your own game. And then I'm going to finish with some ways that you can use Flopzilla Pro alongside Gto Plus for your own studying. If you haven't seen those other videos, that's fine. They're not a prerequisite for this, but you can check them out either on my YouTube channel or you can see them on my website, lukic.io. The address is at the bottom of the page. I have a lot of video and written content and really all focused on how to use data to better improve your poker game. But without any further delay, let's just jump right into the video and take a look at Flopzilla Pro. So when you first open up Flopzilla Pro, this is the screen that you see, and I've changed a couple things with the ranges here, but you basically see this screen, and there's a few different components. I'll go through each of these, but at a high level, I'm going to just talk through the different areas of the screen to start off. So we're going to start by actually going through the settings where you can actually configure how you want the interface to look. There's this section up here, which by default only shows one range, but you can add multiple ranges in here to compare 2 or more ranges to one another. Here is the grid, which allows you to interact with the ranges. It allows you to add hands or combos to an individual range. There's this board section right here, which, as you've probably guessed, it will allow you to enter a board, whether it be just a flop alone or also include turns and rivers. There's a filtering section here with all of the stats. So when you have a range and when you have a board, this will automatically fill in to give you the breakdown of how that range interacts with the board as it relates to the individual hands that you can actually make and how that's actually weighted throughout the course of your range. The section up top gives you the ability to input dead cards. So maybe you want to analyze your opponent's range, but you want to take out your cards because you have certain key blockers or just the other additional information that you have from knowing your own cards. you can do that with this section here. And then finally, the right-hand side will be populated when we actually have ranges and boards inputted, and that gives you a little bit more information about ranges and lets you do a little bit more detailed analysis. So, as I mentioned, I'd like to start by digging into the settings section. So there's a few different icons here that you can change your configuration of how you want Gto Plus, Flopzilla Pro to look. The majority of which you just end up going off of this gear icon that allows you to edit the startup settings. These 4 components here, which is switching to single player mode, switching to classic mode, stop enlarging the window downwards, and setting the magnification. This allows you to change settings for your individual session. I'm not going to click on any of them now, because one thing I've noticed with the settings section in general is if you change any of these, the window gets very finicky. So the window changes size and it starts getting a little bit it's a little bit of a finicky, and it's tough to actually navigate. So I'll just give you an example of that. Actually, if I switch to single player mode, you'll see kind of the window shrink down, and if I switch back to multiplayer mode, it goes larger, but it doesn't go back full screen again, so I actually have to change the sizing of the screen. So I'm going to keep it as is. If you click on the startup settings, some of these are the same sections here. So using group mode at startup, so that's this icon right here. Group mode just refers to whether you want a single filter or multiple filters. So you don't have any harm of having multiple filters. That's why I always have this clicked. A lot of times I only use the one color-coded filter. I don't find a need to color-code them into multiple buckets, but sometimes you want to break things out based on hand classes or based on different parts of your range, and it's nice having the flexibility to be able to do so. Multi-way mode, which aligns to this icon right here, that's the setting that lets us look at multiple ranges. If you want to use single-player mode at startup, it allows you to only look at one range. Again, by staying in multiplayer mode, you don't have to look at multiple ranges. So I don't know why you would actually click on the single player mode option in this case here. I think multiplayer mode is the way to go. And then the use large vertical window at startup. I like more screen space, so that's what I tend to use here. If you don't do that, it will shrink the size of the window a little bit. The appearance, there is a dark mode. I don't think the dark mode looks that great with all of the stats, so I choose not to include that. Using a larger area for stat names, it just gives you more real estate over here, which I think is nice, especially when you're doing a little bit more analyses. And then some of the optional statistics below here too. So also including one card backdoor flush draws. I like to include those. Also include no flush draws. I don't include that, but I don't think that is very harmful to do so. So and when you get to a settings that you are comfortable with, you could just click this button down here and store your current filter settings as default. So moving down to the ranges section. So Gto Plus, I keep saying Gto Plus, Flopzilla Pro, we'll get to Gto Plus shortly, but Flopzilla Pro allows you to store ranges here. So I put a couple in here for the purpose of this video, but when you have ranges that are already stored in here, you simply just highlight over something and then double click on it, and that allows you to actually populate a range in your window here. It also, you'll see, gives you a little bit more of information as to the stats, and these are stats across all boards. So we can see across all of our boards here that this range is going to make top pair almost 16% of the time, over pairs almost 8% of the time, etc. So you can kind of actually see a breakdown, and you can do some pretty good analysis of just ranges without a board on here. You can add your own ranges. So let's say I wanted to clear this out and just come up with a range of pocket pairs. And this is my pocket pair range. I can just click this button down here and say add range and change the settings and just type in what I want this to call. So I'll call this pocket pairs and hit accept. And now I have a new range that's in here that I can actually, if I clear it out and enter pocket pairs, I have my range saved. And then finally, I can actually import ranges myself. So I can import ranges by going to the settings screen and import predefined ranges from newdefs2 or newdefs3.txt. And what you'll notice is actually if I open up my actual directory, you'll see that I have to store this file to the same directory as Flopzilla.exe. So that is stored within our program files and in Flopzilla Pro, and the .exe file is actually set here. What you'll see here is I have a file named newdefs2.txt. I actually don't know how to create these files. I was actually worked with somebody else to get this export, but if you do have these exports, whether it be from Gto Plus or whether you've gotten this from someone else, you actually just go straight to, and it's already in your directory. Make sure that this button is highlighted and you see newdefs2.txt. You have to make sure the right file is highlighted, and then you click import ranges. I do not want to replace my current ranges because that's the example I'm going through today. So I'm going to click this and say import into subcategory. And when I click import ranges, you'll see the imported ranges pop up, and it will tell me that it successfully imported my ranges. And then you can see these are the ranges that I actually included in here too. So I have some ranges that are predefined that I can actually use in my analyses. If you do try to have the wrong file listed, so if I have newdefs3.txt and try to import ranges, you're going to get this error message. It just says failed to import ranges. So you have to make sure that the right file is stored within that directory when you actually import them. Again, I don't know how to create these files, so if you have any questions on that, I would recommend emailing the support at Gto Plus on learning how to do that. So moving on to the grid here. The grid is going to be where we interface and we look at our ranges as a whole. And if you've used any software in the past, poker software, they're all going to have some grids to some form or another. There are different ways you can actually interface with this grid. So one, we've already mentioned that you can take saved ranges and just double click on them, and that will bring up a range for you. You can use these buttons here below to change this. So suppose I want to clear this out, I can go to a cleared range. I can have only pocket pairs. I can add Broadway cards. I can add suited cards, or I can add all the cards. And as you can see, it's very additive here. And then ultimately I can just clear everything out. I can manually add hands into a range. So suppose I only wanted to add aces, kings, queens, and jacks. I can build a range that way. And what you've probably noticed is that this text box continues to fill out based on what I actually select. And it does it in a nice shorthand manner. I can actually do this in reverse. So, I have aces through eights here. If I cut this out and then clear, if I actually want to just enter in aces through eights and hit enter, you'll see that the range gets pre-populated. So this is really handy if you get ranges from other software. A lot of times you can get them as text outputs, and you could just copy paste them into this text box and build a range that way. There's these two functions at the bottom which you need to actually have a range filled out first. So let me just pick my suited Broadway region as a range. And suppose I actually want to only look at, for the ace high hands, I only want to look at those with that are suited in hearts for some reason. If I click on this button here, I can actually select one of these combos of suits. So I could either be, and this is actually pretty nice in the sense of if you're trying to build a range out, you can actually look at specific configuration. So maybe I only want to include hands that contain one heart, or maybe I want to look at hands that are suited here. In our case here, obviously all of these are only suited. So when I hover over that, you can actually see that little box. And right now we're including all hands for the 4 different suits, whether it be hearts, clubs, diamonds, or spades, but I only want to include hearts for the ace high hands. So I just select hearts here. I highlight my 4 hands that I want to include, and you'll see they have this green diagonal on top. And then I hit apply selection, and then when I actually hover over this again, you'll actually see that Ace King suited, Ace Queen suited, Ace Jack suited, and Ace 10 suited. I only have hearts selected, whereas the rest of these have all 4 of the suits selected. So just a good way that we can specify at the suit level. You could apply groups here. I don't use this much at all. But suppose I wanted to actually put the King, Queen, King Jack, King 10, Queen Jack, Queen 10, and Jack 10 into a different group. It's defaulted at group 1, but maybe I want to include them as group 2. I just make sure group 2 is selected and highlight them. And then I hit OK. Nothing will change with the range, but it gives me a flexibility of including that, visualizing this a little bit differently, so I can actually look at how this range visualizes by different hand categories. Finally, I can actually weight individual combos too. So right now everything so far has been weighted at 100%, but let's say I also want to add 50% of my premium pocket pairs. I select 50% here. I can either type it in or I can use this slider, and then I click on the hands that I want to include. So my premium pocket pairs 10s plus, you're going to see this little green bar here, which is going to represent that for each of these pocket pairs that we have a 50% weighting here too. So again, just different ways you can interface with this range and actually build out a range that we can utilize. I'm going to clear this out, and then what I'm going to use for the purpose of this video is a sample under the gun range. This is not, I'm not advocating specifically for this range. This is just a sample under the gun range for an online 6-max game, and it's a 17.6% range. You might find this to be too tight, too loose. It really depends on obviously the game that you're sitting in, and again, I'm not going to advocate for that range specifically, but we're going to use that for the purpose of this analysis. So the next part is actually filling out a board. So you'll see that as I fill out this range, some of the stats here are populated, and I'll go through the stats in a second, but the next thing what the stats are showing right now are how this range interacts with all boards, which is interesting to know. It's interesting to know like the percent of hands that meet certain criteria. So, it's interesting to know that this range makes quads 0.07% of the time. It makes top pair 16% of the time, right? So, and you can actually hover over these and get some pretty cool info about this specific range. But it's somewhat less actionable to look at this across all flops, and a lot of times we want to look at this at a specific board. So I'm just going to pick a nice random specific board. So we'll just say the ace of hearts, the 10 of clubs, and the 6 of diamonds. And once I fill out this board, you're going to see that some other things are filled out as well too. So now, instead of having percentages, you see that some of these statistics here on the right-hand side are taken out. So we can't have quads, right? So the best hand we can make here is a set. It does include a straight here, but we have 0 straights. And you'll actually also see let me actually take this away. So you'll see that right now there are 234 combos in our pre-flop range, and it's nice that that's listed here below. When I add an ace of hearts, that actually takes our combos down to 207, because some of these hands contain the ace of hearts, and now once it's on the board, it's impossible for us to have that in our range. 10 of clubs, that brings our combos down to 197, and then 6 of diamonds, it brings our combos down to 193. So it's a good way to actually stay fairly dynamic and see how many combos do we have in our range. And those 193 combos are broken out into different values here. So of those combos, 9 of them are sets, 11 of them are 2 pair, 57 of them are top pair. And as I hover over each of these, you can see what parts of my range make up the different components. So this is a good way of actually visualizing hand classes and how to actually how you can actually interact with the components of the range. I can actually hit tab here, and it says this here for percentage mode. You'll see this item down here. For percentage mode, hit tab. If I hit tab, what happens now is you can see what portion of my range. And this is important to actually understand the density of your range. Now, obviously, it's great to know that 57 combos are top pair. But if you're not also keen to understanding that, what's your overall size of your range, that can get lost as to what portion of your overall range that is. Whereas if I hit tab, I can know that with this board, I hit top pair almost 30% of the time. I hit top pair or better almost 40% of the time, as I'm also hitting 2 pair almost 6% of the time and hitting sets almost 5% of the time. So it can give you context as to what portion of your overall range is the strength of your overall range, and what portions of your overall range are sitting in certain areas. And it gives you a good idea of the shape of your overall range. So moving forward, the next thing I want to cover is just some of these sections down here and the filtering capabilities. So, we have our board of ace 10 6 rainbow. We can clear that, and it brings us back to the main screen. We can put a random board in there, and you can keep hitting random. And this is great if you just don't really care what board you want to study. You just want to study, any type of board. And you see our stats change every single time the board changes. So, on this board, it's pretty draw heavy. There's flush draws, open-ended straight draws, backdoor flush draws. So there's a lot of different stats, whereas I'll get to a smaller one. So this board is a paired board with no flush draw. There's just some open-ended straight draws on this, and actually with this range, there isn't even any open-ended straight draws. There's just pairs, overcards, and back 2-card backdoor flush draws. So your stats are going to change based on the flop that's on the board. You can add turns and rivers. So, once I have these 3 cards on the board, if I want to add a turn, I just simply add a card, and you're going to see this little T denote that it's the turn. Again, you're going to see the stats change. You're going to see the section on the right change, which we'll get into the section on the right in a second. And again, if you hit the last card here, the R will denote river. So this is a way of, the 3 without any little icon on them is going to be the flop. The T is the turn. The R is the river. What you've probably noticed here is, and I'll go back to my ace 10 6 board. What you've probably noticed here is this little filter capabilities, and that's where these filtering mechanism comes in. So suppose you want to use Flopzilla, and one of the great things it's good for is helping with construction, right? So suppose we're trying to construct a betting range on this board. Well, maybe we say we want to bet all of our top pair and better. We want to bet, I'll switch over to combo mode. We want to bet gut shots, and we'll just say that that's it for now. We'll just say top pair and better and gut shots. What we're going to see here is down at the bottom here, we have 193 total combos in our range, and the combos that pass the filters are 129. So what are those filters? Well, the filters are where this blue filter is represented. So if I click on any of these, so if I want to remove top pair, I just click on this again, and you'll see this change. It takes out the top pair section. So what I can do is I can filter things, and after selecting these filters, if I click on this filter button, it moves me forward to the next street, essentially. So when I filter this button, you'll see that the range looks a little bit different. A lot of it is grayed out. Some of the range is, when I hover over it, it actually unfilters out, but a lot of it is grayed out. The cards that do not pass the filter is grayed out. You actually see the combo counts on there too, which is really nice. And you can start adding in turn cards. So let's say, for instance, I want to add in the king as a turn card. Well, now my stats will change and the combos will change a little bit, but we'll also see these numbers change a little bit too. So now instead of having 129 combos that pass the filters, when I add the king of spades, now it's 118 combos, and I can continue filtering here. So let's say, on the turn, maybe I want to only include top pair or better, but in this time I only want to include 2 card gut shots. So in this case here, now I'm only betting 94 of my combos on the turn. If I can filter it again and take it to the river, and we'll just say the river is a blank deuce of spades, well, now it's going to take me to the river and say, on the river, I have, with this range, 93 combos, and I have virtually no bluffs. I have some straights, some sets, some 2 pairs, and then just a lot of top pair. So in this case here, my range is basically devoid of bluffs, and which is likely going to be a problem, especially if I'm trying to polarize in this situation here, because I don't have the requisite bluffs to fill out a good polarized range. So let me just clear this out again. So the filtering functionality I think is great in the sense that it lets you build out, and I'm going to take off the filters, it lets you build out a construction range. So you can choose which combos you actually want to include in that, and see how, and actually count combos and see how that flows from street to street. So the example that I gave was somewhat simplified in the sense that I included all hands of a particular hand class in this betting range. So I bet all my sets, my 2 pairs, my top pairs, and my gut shots, and you see they were all included in this filter. But you can actually get pretty specific down to the combo level. So suppose that I wanted to bet top pair ace jack and better. Well, I can just hover over this, and you can see how, as I hover over each of these, it's going to highlight the hands within my range that make up that hand class. So when I hover over top pair, what's great about this is you see that the 57 combos out of the 193 total combos in my range, these are the ace-x combos that make up that 57 combos. So when I can actually right-click on this, and it will fix this grid to only show the top pair hands. And you'll see that all of these are highlighted in blue, which is my filter, the filter that I'm using here in this case. I can actually deselect the hands I don't want to include and close out of this. And what you'll see here is now that instead of having, this filter here, there's this little gear icon, and that just means that, it's not uniformly being filtered. But when I actually then select my flop to actually filter things through, what you can see now is those lower ace-x hands that were in my range are actually not in my range anymore. Now it's only including those ace-x, that is ace-jack or better. So, again, it's a really cool way of actually doing that. You can get down to the granularity. I'm not going to go into great detail about this, but you can get down to the granularity of only showing specific combos. So, suppose you want to actually show only the ones with hearts, or, betting only hands with 1 heart. You can do any of that here. You just kind of play around with the different ways in which you can actually use this filtering functionality. So I'm going to take the filter off again. The last thing I'll cover here on this section here is just customizing the statistics. This just lets you reset all the filters. So if I want to take all my filters off, I can do that here. if I want to customize the statistics here, I can actually click this button. And what that lets me do here is actually build my own stats, which is really cool. So the stats that we're showing here on the screen are and flush draws and pairs, flush draws plus open-ended straight draws, flush draws plus gut shots, basically combo draws that we have here. You can do really whatever you want to actually build your custom stats. So, suppose you want, you have a board where maybe, you want to look at, specifically, do you have middle pair plus flush draw, right? Or do you have, middle pair plus backdoor flush draws? Things like that. You can kind of combine things in here. You can add, specific suits in here. Really, you can go wild to actually build your own stats. And when you actually build that, that will show up in your stats bucket here in this spot. And then, you can use that as a functionality for filtering. So again, this is great so that you don't have to necessarily work with the canned hand classes that Flopzilla has. If you want to create your own hand classes, you can do that. The last thing I'll note here is there's this invert range function. So let's say I build out my betting range and I'm just going to bet here sets, 2 pairs, top pair, and I turn my filters on. That's what my betting range looks like. But the inverse range is good if I say, well, what does my checking range look like? And my checking range is going to be all the hands that I'm not betting. So by clicking on invert range, what that's going to do is just essentially pick all the hands that were in my range that I did not include in the filters. And that's, my pocket pairs less than the top card, my middle pairs of tens, my pocket pairs below the board, and then just all my non-paired hands. So, again, this is a great way of, if you're trying to work through construction, not only just seeing what your betting range looks like, but seeing what that invert range looks like as well too. So again, I'm going to reset all my filters. As I move forward a little bit, now what I'm going to do is actually show. You've kind of seen this right side of the screen, and not really a lot has been shown on this right side of the screen here. So, the only thing that I really showed you here was you could see as groups. So as I use the filter functionality, what is great here is now that you can kind of actually see the things that are filtered. This can show me how many hands are in each individual group. This is where actually I find using the multiple filters really great. So let's say I want to actually say, okay, well, I'm going to bet sets and 2 pairs as my super value hands, and I'm going to call that super value. And then I have the green filter, which is at my top pair hands, and that's kind of my good value. And then my red might be my draws, so that's my gut shots. So it's a good way of breaking up my range into different buckets right here. And this might not be the best board to actually do so with, because there's not a lot of different hand classes, but a board that's much more draw heavy, whether I think we showed that King Jack 8 example or some two-tone from before, where there's a lot more draws. That's something that you can actually do, and you could probably see a lot better breakout from a filtering standpoint. All right, so again, I mentioned here that we have this section up here where we can actually add a second range, and that's where this right analysis section comes into play much more significantly. So if I want to add a second range, I am simply going to hit this plus button, and it's going to bring up a second range onto the screen. So what I can do here is I actually have the second range that I've put in. So I have that sample under the gun range. I want to see how that sample under the gun range looks against a sample button call range. So when I click on this and I bring a second range, you're going to notice a few things. Well, one, we have some numbers that popped up, and then 2, some stats popped up on the right-hand side. So I'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail. The numbers that pop up here are the equity of our overall range against one another. So, unsurprisingly, particularly on an ace-high board, the under the gun opener has a pretty significant equity edge against a button calling range. And, again, that's not really that surprising here. So, our under the gun opener here has all of the aces, has all of the tens, has all of the sixes, has ace 10 off, ace 10 suited, and ace 6 suited for a lot of the 2 pairs as well. It also has ace king and the ace queen suited, whereas our button calling range has no aces. It only has 50% of tens. It does not have ace 10 offsuit. It does have ace 10 suited and ace 6 suited, and that's essentially it. And it does not have ace king at all, or ace queen suited, and only half of ace queen offsuit. So again, this is not surprising here that because this range is 3-betting a lot of those premium hands that connect with this board, the aces, ace kings, ace queens, ace 10, pocket tens. It's folding ace 10 offsuit. So it's not going to necessarily have as strong of a range, and the equity is going to be much, much lower. There's a few things in these stats here that I think are awesome. One is, and so as I click on each of these, one thing you're also going to see is some stats here on the board. So in this dead card section, and I'll just go through the dead card section first here really quickly. So in the dead card section, it shows the equity of the range that's selected, as well as what percentage of the time overall that we win, versus as well as what percentage of the time that we tie. So this is just going to ultimately be your equity is going to be equal to the win percentage plus half of this. So it's like 55.5 plus 1.3%, and that's going to get us about the 56.8% there. That's essentially just how we do the math here in this spot. Just as this one's going to be 41.87 plus 1.3% is going to take us up to 43% equity. So this section is going to give us a little bit more in stats. We can also, from a dead card section, so let's say I know that I have ace 5 suited. So I'm just going to say I have ace 5 of clubs. Well, as I select ace 5 of clubs, we can see how equities change, right? So let me take those out of the calculation, and when I you see that the equities now are 56.8 and 43.1. If I remove ace 5 of clubs, let's say maybe my friend showed me that he had ace 5 of clubs, or I have ace 5 of clubs, and I want to see how my opponent's range changes. We can do a lot in here, and we could put these dead cards in here to see how this changes things. So in this case here, if we remove ace 5 of clubs, if we know someone accidentally showed their hand and they folded ace 5 of clubs, I don't know why they would have done that, but let's say they did for some reason. Well, actually our equity edge is slightly smaller in this case here now, because those two cards are dead, and that is ultimately going to impact my range more as the under the gun player, more than it impacts the button calling range in this spot here. It means I have less ace king, it means I have less pocket aces, it means I have less ace 10 offsuit here, whereas my opponent already was at a disadvantage by not having those in his or her range. So that's a dead card section. It's a really great way of kind of just like throwing, if you have additional information, to help change percentages by a few points here and there, and you can kind of see how having some additional information is going to update what you know about a particular hand. Moving on though to the right section though, I did mention that there's this awesome section, and I don't really look at this group output. I think the next 3 graphs though are really, really, really great graphs to look at. First is the equity graph. Now, this is like one of my favorite graphs to look at on a regular basis, and what this is charting out is all of the equity of each individual combo for both players from the beginning to end. The one that's highlighted here, the blue, that's the blue range that we have here. That's our under the gun range. And then this kind of green one that's faint is our opponent's range. And, with this particular board, we can see that, we have a pretty significant equity edge throughout our entire range. So, it's going to be unsurprising if we actually run this through a solve, which we will get to later on, that this is going to be a board where our under the gun range can bet fairly frequently against our the button calling range, because we have such a good equity advantage. But let's say we just actually clear this out, and actually this is a great example that just popped up. So I just hit a random instead of clear, and it's more of a dynamic 9-8-6 rainbow board. Well, now equities are much, much, much more symmetrical. The fact that we have top end heavy overcard advantage is not that significant to us, because our opponent is this board really smashes our opponent's range much more so than ours. So they actually have a little bit of an equity edge, and this is going to be a board where we're going to have to check more on this board, and you're going to see those equities kind of run more symmetrical to one another throughout the course of the entire range. So it's really interesting to kind of look at this, and we can click on our opponent and see. Once I click on my opponent's range, now the green becomes the dark highlighted one, and the blue fades out a little bit, and you can kind of see and scroll through from left to right and look in order what are the hands and where are the drop-offs. So we can kind of see this from the table below that we have our sets at the beginning, our opponent does, and they have all of the sets, 9s, 8s, and 6s, and then 9/8 suited with a slight drop-off in equity. So 9/8 suited, we have two combos of that have about 81% equity compared to the sets which have close to 90% equity. And then after that, we have 8/7 suited, pocket 10s, but our equity drop off is fairly significant after kind of the top end of our range here. But it does show that there is a portion of our range here as the button caller, or there's a portion of this button calling range that can really build a polarized response if the under the gun range gets a little too crazy, or they could just build a polarized betting range in general if our under the gun player just checks at us, because it's going to be that much better than the majority of hands in the under the gun range, and they can choose some other hands. A lot of times it's going to be hands that are either hands like Jack 10 or other hands that maybe contain a 7 that would be great to kind of be the bluff portion of that polarized range here. Our equity matrix is cool because this is a visual way of looking at, for each of the individual hands in our range, what is the equity of each of the individual hands. So now I'm showing the button calling range, and we can see that equity is going to be concentrated in this section of the range right here. So anything that really kind of smashes that board in the hands that have 10s, 9s, 8s, 7s, and 6s, are all going to be kind of really good from an equity standpoint. Whereas, a lot of the overcards, wheel aces, and then under pairs are trash. If I shift over to the under the gun range, somewhat similarly, it's going to be just basically pocket pairs. You're going to be kind of top card dense with a lot of 9s here. Some 8s here that have decent equity. And then again, there's a lot of kind of overcard, trash. And that's really what's causing our range to weaken significantly, is because we do have a lot of overcards that just don't connect with this board, particularly the offsuit varieties where there's just a lot more combos of them. And then the last graph here I want to go through is just the hotness graph. What this shows is the relative equity what the equity of each range would be on different turn cards. Now, I want people to be careful about this. This is only going to be relevant to the entire ranges. So right now, yes, aces are a better card, or this is saying is that cards higher than a 10 are better cards for this under the gun range than they are for the button calling range, and that is true when we are looking at all ranges in their entirety. However, if we take lines where we're splitting some of our ranges, so let's say we choose to only bet hands that are connecting with this board. So let's say we choose not to bet our overcards. We just choose to bet sets over pairs where top pairs are better. And when we hit our filter functionality, you're going to see this change. And what that changes now is that's going to basically help us determine the hotness is going to change, because now this is looking at these cards relative to the updated range that I've included in here. So now that I've taken out the trash of my range, some of the other hands are not going to be as effective, or some of the other cards may not be as good for us as they were as they appeared without the filtering functionality. The other thing I do want to actually caution people on is these colors are always relative to themselves. So you'll see here that it looks like, green's really, really good, orange to red is really, really bad. But if you actually look at the numbers here, these are, this is saying that, aces are giving us 53 to 54% equity, whereas like, fives are the worst at around 45% equity. If I hit that filter functionality, you may look at this and say, hey, aces are bad, but aces are we still have with this functionality here about 66% equity. If I look at this, subset of a range compared to my opponent's overall range, it's just not that great as compared to some of the other cards. So it's not one of the best cards, like a 9, for instance, here, which, we have, 80-ish% equity when a 9 rolls off with this particular range. This hotness graph, again, it's a great way of looking at turn cards. You just have to be very, very, very careful of making sure that you're constructing ranges first. So, in my case here, I would not only want to build out my own range and hit the filter functionality, but I'd also want to build out my opponent's range and say, well, maybe they only call with, certain types of hands, and after I hit their filter, now we can actually compare these two ranges to one another, because we can kind of assume that this was our betting range and this is our opponent's calling range here in this spot. And this is going to be a more clean representation of how our ranges are actually performing against one another with those assumptions being made. What's also great about Flopzilla is that it's not only limited to 2 players. So if I want to add a third range, I can do so, or a fourth range. So let's say, I have a third range that's going to call, out of the big blind, and maybe that big blind is going to have a pretty wide range and there's always a little bit of a lag here because it does these calculations in real time. But let's just say our big blind is going to have something. We'll just give them a fairly wide range, and that's, it doesn't have to be perfect, and that probably looks like it's, good enough here in this spot. So when I add in a third player to the mix, now I can see how equities change against each of these individual players too. So, now again, you're going to have an equity graph where we can actually see how all 3 ranges interact with one another. And, this is a really cool way to kind of, while we don't have 3-handed solvers other than simple 3-way, this is a good way to visually look at how multiple ranges interact with one another, and let you start kind of building out some strategies to put different components of your range into different betting classes. So I definitely urge you to kind of play around with this and look at whether it's 2 ranges, 3 ranges, etc. All right, so the last thing, I got to click twice to delete that. The last thing I want to look at here is actually, how do you actually use this with Gto Plus? So I'm going to go back to my original board. So we have ace, 10, and 6. And like I mentioned here, we have this big equity advantage. But, how do we actually use this with Gto Plus? Well, Gto Plus has this functionality. You're going to see this drop down here, which is from Gto Plus, and you can actually export this to Gto Plus. And this works actually both ways. So if I wanted I have Gto Plus open. Gto Plus has a Flopzilla Pro, which I don't have anything in populated right now. But if I had a board in Gto Plus that I wanted to look at in Flopzilla Pro, I could actually use that export to Flopzilla Pro functionality. But I'm going to start from Flopzilla Pro, and what I'm going to do here is, if I have everything set up here, and let's say I've done the analysis and I feel pretty good about a construction, or I feel pretty good about analyzing these ranges, and I actually want to see how this looks in a solve, I can actually export this to Gto Plus, and when I click that, it's going to give me the option to either export one range or both range to Gto Plus, and then or export the board as well too. I want to export everything, so I click OK. And when I click over at Gto Plus, you're going to see now that I have everything in here. So my ranges are in here, the board is in here. I can just build a tree and go from there. So, let's just quickly build a tree here in this spot here. We have our button opening, or sorry, under the gun opening. We'll just say the under the gun opens to 3 big blinds, the button calls, and the blinds both fold. So we have a 7.5 big blind stack. Effective stacks are 100. And we're just going to simplify this and say that we're going to have a simple tree, and without kind of getting too complex, we can bet 50% pot or not. So, and after we do that, we can build our tree. And I know this is obviously not the best, structure for a tree, but, just to prove the point here, though, is that we have our board already built out, and we can build our tree this way. And from here, we can actually run our solver. And I'm just going to run this to 1%. So, as my solver's running, what I have here is a way that I can actually link Flopzilla Pro up to Gto Plus, so that I can actually use the two hand in hand together. So I can actually, whether I want to actually start by doing a construction exercise in Flopzilla and then export to Gto to solve for comparison purposes, or whether I actually want to start with Gto solve and then actually try to build an exploitative approach against particular opponents and their ranges and what I think that they're going to do with particular combos. I can work either way and perform some pretty detailed and complex analyses. So, I think it's just a really cool tool and really cool functionality to be able to do so. I definitely think that the two can work hand in hand to be really, really effective in your study. So the solve is run, and as we see here, to no surprise here, we have the equity edge as the under the gun player. We can bet a large portion of our range. You might be surprised to see that we're actually still checking 39%, and that's simply because one, we're out of position, and position is going to be fairly significant in a lot of these scenarios here. And then two, our opponent still does have a lot of ace-x, and ace-x is just not going anywhere on this board. So, we can't bet freely. It's not like we have a complete equity advantage. There are hands that we, definitely are incentivized to check. Kings, queens, obviously being several of them here. My weaker ace-x hands are some of those. But again, obviously we have more free reign to bet here in this spot. So the last thing I actually want to cover here in this spot here, and I didn't cover this in my previous videos with Gto Plus, but and it's not necessarily a Flopzilla functionality, but it's actually being able to play against the solution. In this spot here, when after I've done this analysis in Flopzilla, I've exported it to Gto Plus, I can actually click this play against the solution function, and I can actually let me choose whatever and test myself against the solve. So, for instance, let's say we're the under the gun player and we wanted to test our out of position versus the current tree. I can do a live export to Flopzilla Pro. So there is that functionality here to take a look at those two together. And I'm gonna see if I can't put these two side by side so that we can see this functionality. So let me see, this is where I'm talking about with the, it doesn't look like it's going to let me do that really nicely there, but that's okay. We'll just do that. So as I'm ready, I can hit sit down as I'm doing a live export to Flopzilla Pro. And in this spot here, I can it can give me a chance to figure out what I should be doing here in this spot here. So, suppose I want to say I'm going to be betting in this spot. You can actually see the ranges are recalculating on the fly. So, now we can actually see that the 9 of clubs turn card comes out. The 9 of club turn card comes out actually out on the turn, but we can actually also see how our range composition changes. So this is a good way of us in real time saying, well, yes, I bet my queen jack of clubs, queen jack offsuit, and that's actually what my solve says that I should have done here, because 78% of that is being put to that betting range. And the turn 9 comes giving me more equity in the open-ended straight draw. I should probably be betting again. I bet again, and my opponent calls. Now when the river comes, it's a jack. And I again am in this spot here now where I have my hand. I can actually, choose to check or bet again, and I think you could probably make good arguments for both in this case here. The queen of clubs blocks that club flush, but I do have a jack there to give me at least some showdown value. So if I put a check, my opponent can check back here and then has the ace there. When I'm actually done here, I can actually... I'll go back to my overall here. When I actually look at this, I can actually see, is this the way I should have played the hand? And when I'm actually studying this, it does show me that I can actually highlight over the hand and see that, yes, I put a bet in on the flop, and the EV of my bet and check are both somewhat comparable, right? So you bet slightly better than check, and we choose to bet with a larger portion of our range here. So you really could do either in that spot. When I choose to bet and villain calls, on the turn, as I pick up equity, the EV of bet and check are somewhat similar. We can do somewhat of both, but bet is slightly preferred. And when I choose to bet and my opponent calls, again on the river, the EV is somewhat similar. As I mentioned, you could probably make a good argument for both, but in this case here, I chose to check, which is done much more frequently within the solve. So, it's a good way of testing, how playing against the solution and testing to see, are you in line with what the equilibrium solution looks like? I think this is actually far better if you actually node lock this. So, for a little bit of, just kind of a tutorial on how to actually node lock, go back to one of my previous Gto Plus videos and get into actually building a node lock tree. Because when you're playing against a solution, you actually want to play against the node locked version, because that's going to be much more similar to you playing against a player versus playing against an equilibrium solution that doesn't exist in the real world. So that takes us to the end of this how-to video. I hope that you found this helpful. If you have any questions, comments, leave them in the comment section below, or reach out to me through my website. My website is lukic.io. There's ways to get in touch with me there, whether it be for questions about any analyses, offering comments, feedback. If you're interested in some of the custom products or custom data solutions that I put together, you can get them there. Or if you're interested in talking through either collaboration opportunities or getting coaching, anything, just reach out to me anytime. As I mentioned, I took a few months off to deal with life and life changes, but I'm back and I'm creating content on a more regular basis again. So be on the lookout for more videos in the future. I plan on probably putting out a video every 6 to 8 weeks or so. I'm also putting out more written form analysis based content on my website somewhat regularly, also probably every 6 to 8 weeks or so in an alternating basis. So, definitely check it out. Sign up for my mailing list to be notified for when the next posting comes out. Hit the subscribe button below to be notified for when the next video comes out. And thanks again for watching today.